Before we start with the session, one simple request while the discussions are going on, in case you need to discuss something, you can exit for a few moments, do your talk, and then join us back. The decorum of the summit needs to be maintained. Silence needs to be maintained. Ladies and gentlemen, let's welcome with a thunderous round of applause our chief guest for this session, Mr. Gajendra Singh Shekhawat, Minister of Jal Shakti, Government of India. Can we have a round of applause, sir? Welcome, sir. Mr. Pranav, Bhanage, Chief Executive Officer, Petronas. Mr. Anish, Partner and Head Energy and Natural Resources, KPMG. Ms. Naina Lal Kidwai, Director, Narara Energy Limited and Chairperson, Max Financial Services. And as our moderator, we have Dr. Malka, Ambassador, Israel. Can we have a round of applause for our esteemed group of panelists? The session is Energy and Water Stress. Where does India go from here? The session is sponsored by Petronas. Over to you, sir.
Good afternoon, everybody. We are going to have a very interesting session about water and energy, two twin challenges that go together alongside, because when we want to generate power, energy, we need fresh water. When we want to get more fresh water, if we want to desalinate or recycle water, we need a lot of energy. So these two challenges go together, and what we'll try to do today is to think what steps we should take, in what pace and in what scale, in order to narrow the gap between the sources and the users, this gap between demand and supply. I can tell you, just as a beginning, and then I'll transfer to my distinguished guest here, partners in the panel, that Israel, as far as water is concerned, started for a very low starting point. Israel mostly desert, 60% desert, and the rest is semi-arid area. Mostly with about 100 millimeters annual rainfall, and now has abundance of water. We gained full control over the water issue, although since independence 72 years ago, the rainfall dropped by more than half due to climate changes, and the population grew 15 times since independence. Still, Israel now has, as I said, abundance of water and also export water to our neighbors in order to ease the water stress in the region. So what we'll try to do now is to see how we can harness the technology, the methods, the experience that Israel is keen to share with its precious partner here in India, and to take the right steps in order to ease the water stress. As I said, water is engaged with energy, so we'll talk about these two, try to understand what will be the optimistic equilibrium between these two. So I'd like, please, to start with the Minister of Jal Shakti, His Excellency. Please, if you can just tell us what India should do now. What steps, please?
Thank you, Malka. When I was just joining before coming on the dais, and we met outside in the lounge, my first comment was, when a person from Israel is there sharing your dais, no one has an authority to speak on water. As Mr. Ron Malka introduced himself, Israel is a country, nation, which is a role model as far as the water. They are role model for other things also, but they are a role model for rest of the world as far as the water is concerned. See, a country like Israel, which has only 100 millimeter average rainfall, and almost entire country is arid or semi-arid or a desert, that has converted itself into the vegetable and fruit bowl for entire Europe, if I'm not wrong. And they have abundance of water. I do remember when Ben Gurion, he was addressing the scientists and the engineers of the nation soon after the independence. He said, if you wish to find out a solution for water security for the nation, then you'll have to find that solution in desert. And the scientist, I'm forgetting the name, they went to the desert, Negev desert, and they found there is a tree which was growing exceptionally high. And small droplets of water was coming through a source there. They could found the drip irrigation method there. And in 1962, the country adapted drip irrigation system. And now entire world is transferring towards that. So if we have to speak about water, and we have to learn to achieve the water security from the success stories from the Israel or any other country, the country like Cambodia, which has attained the water security, the very poor country, but there are only 4 pillars. First, conservation of water. See, in India, we are having 4,000 billion cubic meter rainfall every year. And as His Excellency Malka was saying that in his country, the population rose 15 times. Thank God that in India, it is still 4 times. But at the time of independence, we were having almost 5,000 cubic meters water per capita, which has shrunk now below 1,700, which is water stressed condition. That is, now we are at 1,500 cubic meters per capita. So water conservation in a country like India, where 4,000 BCM is the rainfall or the precipitation, total water which comes as a snowfall or the rain, our total harvesting capacity over the ground is only 8%. Right from the biggest reservoir, largest dam, to the smallest dam, it is 250 billion cubic meter. And if I include all the storages throughout the country, the smallest, the ponds in the villages, still it is less than 300 BCM. So we are able to harvest only 10%. And the biggest reservoir, I was just talking to my colleagues, my colleagues at the parliament, a couple of days ago when parliament was in session. I just checked with them which is the biggest reservoir in the nation. Everybody stated some of the big, larger dams. I said, no, the dams are not the largest reservoir. Our Mother Earth is the biggest reservoir. We are getting almost 458 billion cubic meter water every year. That too is replenishable from the underground water sources. And we are drawing almost more than 700 billion cubic meter waters. So that gap, and since we are depending 85%, our dependence is almost 85% as far as the rural requirement is concerned, is depending upon the underground water. And if I calculate in total, then it is somewhere around 65% for our irrigation, industry, and drinking water purpose. And other purposes, 65% we are depending upon the underground water. And the huge gap is there between the total replenishment and the withdrawal. So water conservation is one pillar on which we'll have to work. And I'm so thankful that our visionary leader, Honorable Narendra Modi ji, he has come up with a program. First was the integration of ministry, the water which the subject which was being addressed under various roofs, under various ministries, under various hats, now it has been integrated in one ministry. And I'm fortunate enough that that work has been assigned to me. After water conservation, the second thing is judicious use of water. Judicious use, whatever the water is being used, whether it is in home or in industry or in the agriculture. And agriculture being the largest stakeholder, largest consumer, the total 89% of the total water. Whenever we have a chance to speak about conservation or judicious use of water, we start from, oh, hey, ladies, stop having shampoo every day, start shampooing once a week. Or start using bucket in spite of the showers. Or, gentlemen, just switch off turn the taps off when you are brushing or shaving. But still, that matters. But ultimately, we'll have to think of that agriculture, which is the biggest consumer. And our waters are the least productive waters in the earth. We are consuming almost 5,600 liters of water to produce 1 kilogram of rice. Whereas China is producing a kilogram of paddy for 356 liters of water. So there's a huge gap. We'll have to think of that. So our Prime Minister, he started the scheme, per drop, more crop. Each and every drop counts. And we have come up with a large program for transferring our farmers from the flood irrigation system to the micro irrigation system, and a huge sum of land that has been transferred. And the third thing, after the judicious use of water, is the reuse of water. Israel is again a pioneer in that field. They are almost using 82% of their water which has been excreted from the domestic homes or the industries. See, I was just going through a document, a book, or rather I should say it was a study report. They said that ideal situation should be the treated water should flow in the canals for use in the industry or for the agriculture purposes. And the fresh water should flow in the rivers. Whereas throughout the world, not only in our country, throughout the world, the fresh water is being used into agriculture, and untreated sewage or the effluents, they are being disposed of or terminated in the rivers. So this is, and water, as Mr. Ron Malka was saying, it is water and energy generation or power generation is integrated. What I say, water and word is integrated. You cannot think of life without water. And the way the world is heading and the sources of water are shrinking throughout the world. See, energy we can transfer easily, and India is a pioneer and a leader on that. We can go and easily switch on the renewable sources of energy. We can use sun for the energy, but for water, how we will get it? And the desalination is not going to solve the problem, because everywhere in the world there is no sea. So we'll have to think of it and start conserving water, judicious use of water, reuse of water, and then rejuvenation of old water structures, what we have lost. Thousands of water bodies. The gentleman sitting on the dais and the gentleman sitting in this auditorium might have seen in their life, the people older than me, that there used to be a river here. Come on, I'm talking because I'm talking in an audience with the leaders of the industry. Let us start let us pledge ourselves for, as Honorable Prime Minister have taken a call, a Jal Shakti Abhiyan has been initiated. 256 districts have been identified, where the 1,500 most critical blocks are there. Under those blocks, we are identifying and working on multiple approach. The senior officers from working in the government of India have been sent there, and they have been made as a nodal officer for those districts to identify the problem, to identify the solution, to create a Jan Andolan, the people's movement, to address that issue. I hail all of you sitting here. Please come together. Identify a work for yourself. Whether it is rejuvenation of a river, whether it is rejuvenation of a traditional water body, traditional source, or all the rejuvenation activities which can be for the tributaries of a river, that is going to secure us, our nation. See, the God or the nature, still it is so kind on us, all of us, especially if I speak about our country. We are getting 4,000 BCM of water. If we are able to tap and use it judiciously, our generations can survive. With this, though we are the most vulnerable as far as the climate change is concerned, impact of climate change is concerned, the time of the rain, the spell of the rain, which used to be earlier in 4 months, it has shrunk now to almost 30, 40 days. And the incidences of cloud bursting, they are increasing. The rain time, the rain pattern, the scanty and erratic rain pattern, what we are seeing. The government is doing its work, but still, we will also, the society will also have to come together, and each and every person on the earth will have to come together. Then only we can save our generation from this challenge which is emerging in front of us. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Mr. Shekhawat. As you well stated, it's really a comprehensive approach on the side of the resources and sources, enhancing the sources, and managing efficiently the uses. Mrs. Kidwai, please, if you can just make this distinction between what we should do in the sources part of the equation and what we should do in the uses part of the equation, please.
A big subject and a tough one to follow the minister with what he has laid out before us, and you, Your Excellency. So I would like to really look at this as the water, energy, and food nexus. And in terms of sources, clearly agriculture, as rightly defined by the minister, is the biggest user, 89%. So what we grow, rice in water-starved areas of the north, which were traditionally wheat, and then we export basmati, full of that water, to other parts of the world. And on the other, what we eat, which also impacts what we grow, and indeed the climate change that was mentioned as well. So the food, water, and energy nexus have to be looked at in totality. But looking at sources, and one of the spaces I work in is as chair of the FICCI Water Mission, that we are very focused right now on water efficiency for industry. Small user compared to agriculture, but still a critical user, and one which has to look at the way it uses water, both inside the factory, but also outside the fence, so what we call water stewardship. And the role of industry to minimize this water use and make water available to the communities around where it functions is purely in self-interest, but critical for ensuring that communities don't rebel against that use of water which the plant needs. And with it comes technology, efficiency, and ways of actually tackling water use by industry. And I think a very important element therein. A related space on the source of water would also be the pricing of water. We were discussing this earlier as well. How do we price for this water? And what we are also working on is the price for wastewater. We treat water only to throw it into drains and back into polluted rivers, so it just mixes in there, as against reuse in a power plant, which Nagpur has now done. It's directed its wastewater into a power plant, or wastewater, if I'm treating water at the Resident Welfare Association level, back into horticulture, or into agriculture. So the circular economy, as it comes from treated water, which has uses, instead of just chucking it away, and how we price for water at each stage, including wastewater, becomes another way to ensure that we protect ourselves from misuse on the one hand, which is to ensure that water is properly treated, as in sewage gets properly treated, and then the price for it helps to pay for the treatment of that sewage, because otherwise that sewage goes back to pollute the river, which you're trying to keep clean, exactly as the minister said in the first place. So the solutions actually are staring us in the face. We don't need a space scientist to sort this one out. The issue has really been that it has been so disconnected as we looked at each vertical for itself rather than solve for the problem as a whole, that we now have to break through mafias, vested interests, and find our way through a maze of issues, whereas the solution is staring us in the face, but executing on the solution is proving difficult. And I would just end by saying that none of this is possible without money and finance. And for money and finance, we need an ecosystem which works, a legal system which understands the sanctity of contracts, so that we do not see what happened in renewable energy right now, where tariffs agreed upon are renegotiated again and again. And in that ecosystem, the legal structure, sanctity of contract, proper pricing, and citizens who pay at the right points will all become critical.
Thank you so much. And talking about efficiency, I start with Mr. there. What should we do in order to build the right structure of incentives in order to be more effective and efficient in using water and energy, please?
Sure. Thanks, Mr. Malka, and a pleasure to be here. I think I'll pick up with what Naina said about pricing. And we need a lot more pricing innovation to signal to efficiency. The problem which we have in India in particular is that we have treated water as an entitlement. Everybody treats it as an entitlement. It's not just the agricultural user or domestic user. Even a power plant treats the water allocated as a free entitlement or a very nominally priced entitlement. Hence there's no incentive or there's no signal to conserve water, reuse water. And I think that's where we need to first start. Since in aligning to the topic, which is on the energy-water nexus, I think if we look at, apart from agriculture, one of the biggest users of water is in power plants, the thermal power plants. And India is about 60–70% of India's power comes from thermal power plants. And we've seen a whole lot of unproductive use or wasteful use in power plants. We used to have till 1999, till 2000, we have built power plants with open loop systems. Okay, so when you build a power plant with open loop system, you actually are using about 7 to 8 times the water as a closed loop system. We've since banned it, but even then, the amount of water we use in our power plants, thermal power plants, is very, very high. So we need to, kind of draw out every drop of efficiency from that process to make sure that our usage is going further down. And there are alternate technologies which are available to signal to do that. But for that, we first need to signal through pricing innovation. The question which will come is that if you price water much higher than what it is currently, then you're going to raise the cost of water, raise the cost of power. To that, my counter would be that there is some money which is going to get collected, get back to the ratepayer, find an alternate mechanism where whatever is being charged for the thermal power generation in the area of water cost gets fed back to the ratepayer to reduce the rates. But at least you're using the resource productively, because what happens otherwise is that you are artificially reducing the cost of thermal power generation, but not pricing the water. And I think this is where we need to bring a much more comprehensive thinking into this process. First step is to look at what is the right price of that resource which we should be paying, and going away from the theme of entitlement, which including the public sector, which has a theme of entitlement or a feeling of entitlement, to something which is something which they're obligated to do better. Related to that is consciousness. I think as we have Jal Shakti Ministry and Honorable Minister is in charge of the ministry. That's a great step, because apart from everything, you signal to consciousness, human consciousness, by bringing the two together, bringing all these themes together, giving it the importance which it deserves. I think I'm seeing a lot of that, so I'm a little more positive about it than I would have been a few months back. There is a group of secretaries which has been set up by government. There are 10 groups of secretaries which have been set up by government. The group I was recently assisting and continue to assist is the resources group. And one of the biggest things which started, among the recommendations which the group has been making and is evolving, the first thing starts with sustainability. And within sustainability, focusing on recycling of every kind of commodity, metals, water, the whole circular economy being the central theme of all of that has become a big, big thrust. This wasn't the case earlier. The petroleum ministry or the coal ministry never used to think of sustainability earlier and water earlier. Today, it's a part of every scheme which they have. I think that's a very, very encouraging thing to me. And I'm looking forward to this kind of becoming a movement, as the Honorable Minister said. If it becomes movement at the grassroots, and it becomes a movement at the corporates, and it becomes a movement at the policy-making level, then I think it's going to be a great move forward. But I come back to, again, the fact that we first need to send the commercial signals also, or the policy signals, to make sure that actually this whole theme of consciousness actually translates to practical applications on the ground.
Thank you so much. Arnav, what can we do? How creative can we be? What alternatives, energies can we use in order to narrow the gap between the supply and demand? For example, I can tell you that in Israel, we go agriculture in the desert. So in the desert, we don't have available energy. So we use the solar energy in order to enable the drip irrigation, because it needs some level of pressure. So we use solar energies. What are the new alternatives that you can suggest in order to mitigate this challenge, please?
Right. I think I would, before I go specifically to that question, I think I would like to just take a step back here. And if you look at the evolution of humankind, I think our prehistoric ancestors, we used to fear nature. So nature was a natural barrier, it was a natural support, and we always bowed in front of nature. Now, where we evolved from there, and when we reached to the industrial age about 100, 150 years ago, the entire human race started to think that, hey, we can overcome nature. So nature is no longer a barrier. If there was Alps or Himalayas, I can take a flight and go across. So we started to take nature for granted, and we start to use resources the way we think they're abundant. We think we can overcome any natural bridges. I mean, the bridges are built. I think the China bridge, which connects like Hong Kong to Macau, and all these kind of engineering marvels that happen. So I think positively, I think we are coming to this phase now in the last, and it's gathering momentum over the last 4 or 5 years from a corporate side, and also I think I see it from the government side as well, is that now we're coming back to that stage where, hey, I think nature can overpower us. I think we need to really figure out that we are in a constrained environment, and therefore it should we need to change a little bit on our thinking on how we want to approach this challenge that we have. So I am at a very broad level, I am very glad that there is a momentum towards that belief, because with that belief, and I think something like Jal Shakti and all is sort of outcomes of those, and we should be looking to a more positive way forward. Now, specifically, I think if you look at energy as coming in as an enabler, I always look at it in form of the value chain. I think if you look at the value chain of energy consumption, you have starting with the needs, the manufacturing or sourcing, distribution, and then the eventual consumption at the end points. Unfortunately, what gathers momentum and what you see a lot out in the media, press, people clamoring on social media, is the end point of the value chain. Somebody kept the light on for a long time, and then you start saying that he or she is not very energy conscious. I think I would like to look at energy in a more value chain basis, and therefore you start looking at solutions which make sense across the value chain. So a ranging debate, again, to sort of make this point, is that electric vehicles. I mean, there was we talked about in the morning about how EV revolution is coming in, but what is the well to wheel output of this electric evolution? I mean, I'm not too sure. If you're going to use coal-powered power plants to actually produce that electricity and then have a clean, so-called nice little Tesla in the confines of Delhi, I don't think we are actually adding value to the environment. You're probably degrading it. And diesel is probably better. I mean, that'll be the counter argument to it. So from an energy perspective, again, coming back to your question, Ron, in terms of what can be done, I think there are 2 or 3 clear pathways. If you take a more philosophical approach to it, I think solar starts to become the sort of thing that we can take on. And there is a very interesting sort of micro research which is happening on solar, is that do we tap the solar resources on Earth, or is there a way to tap solar resources outside our planet and bring that power back to the planet? So solar sometimes starts becoming a de facto sort of position that a lot of us want to look at as looking at solutions. Then it sort of moves into the space of within hydrocarbon space, having a little bit of cleaner spaces like LNG or compressed natural gas kind of areas, which also sort of reduce your total carbon footprint. But moving forward, I think, I see a world moving towards more natural resources in terms of looking at solar as a big sort of driver for energy needs of our Earth in future.
Thank you so much. And I would like to conclude with a very optimistic note. As I said, Israel is a good example that it's solvable. It can be achieved. We can really mitigate these challenges and narrow the gap. And as I said, Israel is very keen to share its experience, its know-how with our precious friend here in India. And since the wheel is there, we don't need to reinvent it. We just need to make the adjustments, because we understand that India is much, much, much bigger than Israel, much, much complicated. So it's a bigger challenge. But still, we can just harness the technology, the know-hows, the methods, the proven concept, and just bring it here and just implement after doing the needed adjustments. And I'm very optimistic in it. So thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you very much.
I would request you to please stay back for a few moments. Right, ladies and gentlemen, now we move on to the question. Can we have the question, please? Water will become the new oil in 2040. You have your voting pads on. Option A, if you agree, B, if you disagree, and C, can't say. 30 seconds is what you have. A few more seconds and I guess the answer will be revealed instantly. Water will become the new oil in 2040. There you go. 71.6% agrees, 19.75 disagree, and 8.64 can't say anything about it. With that, we come to the end of the session. I would request Mr. Sunil Kant Munjal, sir, to kindly grace the dais and present a memento from our side to our esteemed group of panelists. Can we have a round of applause? First and foremost, our chief guest. Sir.
Yeah, please. I have a question from the people who have voted for no's. That what do you think, that it is beyond 40 or before 40? Because as far as my wit is concerned, the tipping point is very close than to 2040. I don't know the people who have voted for against 2040 with the nose in the question, what they have in their mind. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. With that, can we have a round of applause for our chief guest for the session, Mr. Gajendra Singh Shekhawat, Minister of Jal Shakti, Government of India. Thank you, sir, for giving us your precious time. We can do much better. Let's have a huge round of applause for sir. Sunil, sir. We go with Mr. Day, Mr. Anish Day. Can we have, let's keep the energy going. This was quite an interesting session. As Shekhawat sir is saying, it's all thanks to our moderator who completed the whole session in time, and we still have time to go. So thank you, sir. Thanks a ton. All right. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Kindly bear with us, just 2 minutes to reset for the next session. Thank you, sir. We're about to start. All those who are standing to please be seated. Once again, a humble request to please switch off your handsets or put them in silent mode. A few more seconds and we're good to go. Ladies and gentlemen, our next session is titled The Mindmine Exchange, Reforming Civil and Criminal Justice in India. It's a special one-on-one session. I'd like to invite now on stage Mr. Deepak Mishra, former Chief Justice of India, and Mr. Ajay Bail, co-founder and managing partner, AZB and Partners. Can we have a round of applause for the two gentlemen?
Good afternoon. It's a pleasure to be here. And of course, it's also something that I'm ever overwhelmed by the presence of Justice Mishra here, because his experience obviously is far more than mine. But I will take the liberty of, he's been kind enough to ask me to start this session. And the way we have planned it is that I will speak for a little bit, and then he will give his comments. And the only question that has been permitted to be posed to him has been reserved for me with his permission. So there aren't going to be any questions at the end of the session. I just thought I'd make that clear. But I have been permitted by Justice Mishra to ask him one or two questions, which I will certainly exercise the liberty. I think this topic about the reforms of the legal system, judicial reforms, is not a new topic. It's been discussed time and time again. And very recently, it's also been referred to in the recent economic survey. And there has been a reference to the pendency of cases before the high courts and the district courts. But I think that the way at least I see it, and of course we will hear Justice Deepakji's views on it, no discussion with respect to judicial reforms in the current paradigm is possible to have unless we take a look at the entire ecosystem that is what makes the system. It's not just about the courts, but there are multiple stakeholders. So let's look at the various stakeholders. You obviously got the judiciary, and we'll go a little bit, we all know the roles, but I think there are some multiple nuances here which are worth reflecting on. So you have the judiciary, in which I'm also including in a wider sense the various tribunals we have set up, various regulators we have, various regulatory agencies we have, because they have a very important role in this whole process. You then obviously have the government. The government has multiple roles. It is the provider of infrastructure, it is a litigant, it is an appointer of judges and important positions in various tribunals, and it is also a framer of legislation, which is then placed before Parliament. We then also have the lawyers themselves. All of us are always happy. I think it's a general trait. We are happy to point in the other direction whenever we look at something to do with reforms, that I'm fine, but I think the problem is on the other side. The fact of the matter is, I think we need to be very introspective and recognize that there are certain aspects that we need to reflect on ourselves. There are the litigants who, I believe in this country, have been given a lot of rights. And I'm not talking about people who are suffering without recourse, etc. That, of course, is an issue we should deal with. But generally speaking, having had some experiences in litigating in the West, we have a system where litigants have a lot of rights and no obligations. If you actually look at the track record of how many people have been held guilty of perjury for misstatements, which are, I mean, people don't even think twice about lying on oath, because there is no belief that there will be an effective deterrent insofar as their own responsibility. And then finally, there is the overall society, all of you, all of the people who are not a part of this daily process, but who are important because justice matters to you. Justice dispensed by a nation efficiently matters to you, and your views are also extremely important. And I'll give you an example. If you look back at the reforms in the UK, I'm sure most of you will agree that a more significant contribution to reforms in the UK in the early days was made by Charles Dickens, by his writings about debtors' prisons, where children were held in dungeons for years for stealing a loaf of bread. And the pressure was put on the judiciary and on the system to make those reforms. So I think civil society in India must also exercise that opinion and constantly put pressure on the rest of these stakeholders to make changes occur. Now, very quickly, if you look at the role, the judiciary, and I don't want to enter into any sensitive issue here, but the judiciary broadly has the role of interpreting the law. It could be a purposive interpretation. Generally speaking, we believe the objective is not to make the law, but I don't want to enter into that thorny space at this point of time. But there is one element here that when, I'm a firm believer that everything starts from the top. And once a certain body, which is seen as the apex body, is seen by other people to be exercising its role in a particular fashion, the tendency is for regulators and for inferior tribunals to also start doing the same. And it's only in that context that I've mentioned the interpretational limitations of the judiciary. They also have a very serious role in terms of the exercise of jurisdiction through writs and otherwise, where civil bodies are not discharging their obligations and functions, and that's their role. They also have a very important role in appointments. So they have, again, many faceted obligation and role. The government, obviously, as I said, is again got multiple roles. And then there is all of us, and then there are the litigants. So when we look at this, unless we look at reforms through the entire process and the entire ecosystem and the entire mindset, things are not going to change. And I'll give you an example. The economic survey talked about 3.5 lakh cases pending in the lower courts and in the high courts and the Supreme Court, and they've suggested that if you appointed 90 odd high court judges and some 2,000 odd lower court judges, with some efficiency, some technology, you can solve the problem. What they have actually not addressed at all is that the current judicial framework in which we operate, a large portion of our justice has been allocated to tribunals. We have tribunalized in most areas, very economically important areas actually. You've got the NCLT, you've got the Income Tax Tribunal, you've got SAT, you've got TDSAT. I mean, we all are familiar with the amount of forums that exist for important decision making, which are outside the court system. There has been no reference insofar as the reforms to addressing what dependencies there are. And actually, some of these forums are actually seriously struggling in terms of their manpower, in terms of their resources, etc. Whether you take the NCLT, for example, they're seriously struggling because they started with a certain jurisdiction and then the IBC came in and that was also palmed onto them. So I think that's the kind of issue we are, one aspect which has not been considered. Secondly, we have pain points in the context of our regulatory agencies and our investigative agencies. There are matters which are pending before them, before, let's say, the ED, before PMLA, before various agencies who are investigating matters or who are looking at matters out of adjudication, where none of that has actually been mapped, none of that has been taken into account, and nobody really knows what the statistics are. I mean, if you probe a little bit, I've tried to do a little bit of work because we are the CII, we have set up a committee for judicial reforms. We found that there were 16,000 matters that were with the ED in 2005. And currently there are still 7,000 matters which are outstanding. 4,000 matters have been actually reached an adjudication stage, which means only 1/4 actually go to adjudication. Many have been settled. Nobody knows whether these settlements happened through a Reserve Bank compounding mechanism or was closed at the ED. So all these matters at some point of time are going to get into this pipeline. So the ecosystem is multifaceted here. And when we reflect on any basis for reform, as I said, this has to be a holistic, multi-pronged approach rather than just focusing on judges, which is important. I'm not saying that it's not important, but it's not a solution to everything that is basically needed to make this system happen. So let's come back to some of the more concrete manner in which we have to deal with it. If you look at the economic survey, they said out of the 3.5 crore cases, the predominant pendency is in the lower court. And most of those are criminal matters. A lot of them are technical criminal matters, etc. As you know, a system, let's just step back for a moment. What do we expect out of a good judicial system in a country? You expect speedy, reliable dispensation of justice. You expect people to have access to justice in a reasonable, cost-efficient fashion. And you expect that the system generates enough jurisprudence to be able to create a certain degree of certainty around decision-making, particularly when it comes to economic decision-making. I think those are the fundamentals, and of course, this is one of the questions I'm going to pose to Judge Saab, as to whether he thinks this is a reasonable framework within which to look at what an expectation from a judicial system. Question is, where are we in these processes? I think the answer lies that despite all the efforts made by the judiciary, by different people, we are frankly at a point which is fairly dismal, and I personally feel a point which is soon reaching no return, because the system has become such that even those who ought to get punished are not going to see the day of punishment, because the process of dispensing of punishment is so delayed. And therefore, what has happened is you've got an inverted pyramid here. The objective of every investigative agency is to provide all the difficulties during the investigation stage, because their view is that once the charge sheet is filed and the person is out on bail, the trial is going to take its own sweet time and there's never going to be a conviction. So you actually have a system which is, in my view, operating on its head. And it's only defenseless people who are generally getting a speedy trial because they don't have the ability to defend themselves. So a system cannot operate on that basis where the dispensation of justice is so delayed that even the fear of the punishment is not really a fear any longer. So clearly, insofar as speedy disposal of justice, we are nowhere, and I don't see something happening over the short term unless we do something very dramatic. Take the development of jurisprudence. Exchange control, FEMA, PMLA, these are very, very important statutes which affect most businesses you have to deal with. I asked Justice Mishra when I went to meet with him whether in his career how many matters of FEMA he had actually dealt with. And I posed the same question to two friends of mine who have, one is retired from the Delhi High Court after 24 years, one is still a judge. They could not think of a single matter under the Foreign Exchange Management Act that they've ever dealt with in their entire career. And the reason for that is that it's a place where things go in but they don't come out. Again, what is the reason? There is no limitation. There is no time frame within which a decision has to be taken by the authorities. And as a result, there is absolutely no jurisprudence. Linked to that is a problem of who decides what is right or wrong. If Sunil comes to me and asks a question on exchange control because he thinks somebody else is doing it, and I tell Sunil, I think it's wrong, and by the way, that guy is facing an ED inquiry, so he says, good, I've listened to your advice, I won't do it. He comes to me 5 years later, he says, by the way, did anything happen to those guys? I've been seeing news